Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel, and welcome to our Garry Kasparov series. So in this series, we're following Garry's life and his chess career, and we're back now in the year 1985, but now in this particular moment of chess history, Garry Kasparov was already the world champion in chess because he won his 1985 World Chess Championship against Anatoly Karpov. I've covered, of course, this very important match in chess history. Now we're basically warming up for the 1987 World Chess Championship match between Karpov and Kasparov. And I wanted to show you a great game from 1985 from a simultaneous exhibition in which Garry Kasparov played against many players. And the cool part about this simultaneous exhibition was that Garry Kasparov played here with the black pieces. So many times you'll see the player that is playing, of course, against many players is only playing with the white pieces. But here Garry decided to also to play some games with the black pieces, and this was really brilliant because in this game Garry Kasparov will show us a great and immortal queen sacrifice in an early stage of the game. So be prepared, this was really wild. The player that he was playing against was the player and under the name Frank Berghost. So the simultaneous exhibition was played in Hamburg in Germany. I couldn't find additional info about Frank Berghost. I couldn't also find his picture, so maybe you know more about this player. I'm not sure who that is. Maybe you have some info, you can write it, of course, in the comment section below. Then in the next video I can maybe explain more who this guy was. So of course he deserves all of our respect, but in this game he was simply outplayed by the world champion Garry Kasparov. So let's check out now the game. Here d4 played by Frank Berghost. We have knight to f6 by Kasparov, c4, g6, knight to c3, and now d5. We have the Grünfeld defense on the board. Here knight to f3, then three knights variation, and now after bishop to g7 we have bishop to f4 by Frank Berghost. This is the so-called Hungarian variation, and this is now a very annoying, I think, setup that black can play and black can face. I think Grünfeld defense players don't like so much these variations because this game becomes really sharp. I think both players have opportunities here to win the game, but in the next couple of moves I think you have to react correctly. After move e3, I think it's a necessary move that you have to make now. It's the move c5, and this c5 is sort of a line. It's a sharp line because you're giving up basically your pawn on c5. You could then maybe try some knight to a6, queen to a5 ideas in order to recapture the knight, but the activity that white can also gain with rook to c1, bishop to e2, bishop to d3 castling is of course also a nice opportunity for white. The problem, I think, and that's why the c5 is the natural idea for white here, is that white needs still at least two more tempi in order to secure the king. So white needs to play e2, bishop to e2, and then castling. So two more tempi in order to secure the king, and black has already castled, and black has already challenged the center with the move d5, but also with the move c5. So it's a sharp line. The position is getting open for sure. Now who has a better activity with the minor pieces will probably win the game. So d takes c5, it's also one of the best lines simply to go here for white. Simply take the pawn, and now Garry Kasparov plays knight to e4. There are now many moves that you can make. You see queen to d5 is not so good because you get simply knight to c3. You maybe can take the rook, the queen, then rook takes, of course, the queen on d8, but after b takes c3 you get bishop takes c3, and you lose the rook on here on a1. So you could also after knight to e4 you could also play something like knight to d5, but again it's not such a powerful idea because you have now some trouble. Of course this pawn is hanging, then e6 will happen, so you cannot anymore retreat with the knight, so it's also not a powerful idea. So if you try c takes d5, then it's also not such a good idea because you get knight to c3 followed with bishop takes c3. So the only way here and the best way is simply to play the move rook to c1. Rook to c1 is a necessary move, and it's now an equal game. At least you have protected now your knight on c3 twice. In the continuation, black could try maybe knight to d7, then you can take, and then queen to a5 will be sort of the main line. After queen to c2, knight takes c3, b takes c3, and now maybe after knight to c5, this is playable for both sides. Black has a better activity, but of course white is up a pawn. So it's a dynamic game for both sides. I've been there many times. So it's not so easy to play this position also for white, because the black has now really nice piece activity, but when you hang on to your extra pawn, then of course white could maybe win the game. So after move knight to e4, we have seen now several options for white in the game. Frank Berghost played an inaccuracy, mistake, blunder, you can call it like you want, but the queen to b3 is simply a bad move, and now Garry Kasparov punishes this moment immediately, plays knight to a6. Knight to d7 would be also an opportunity in order to recapture the knight, the pawn on c5. We have c takes d5, knight to c5, and you see now Frank Berghost is trying to hang on to his position by playing the queen and defending the knight. And maybe you can pause the video and try now to see the best continuation for black, because we know, and I've told you, that white needs still 2 more tempi in order to secure the king. So bishop to e2 and then castling is necessary now for white, because white has now an extra pawn, but you have to now secure the king or you're getting destroyed by this piece activity that black has built here. So the best move now for black is simply to attack this position further. You're not allowing here white to breathe, you're not allowing here white to castle. So that's why Garry Kasparov played now a very aggressive b5. And here after knight to b5, queen takes b5 is of course not a possibility. You get again this idea, a knight take bishop to c3, knight takes c3, and similar ideas. So that's why knight to b5, and here Garry Kasparov takes out the pawn on b2, the rook is hanging, and here Frank Berghost plays the move bishop to c7, attacks the queen. And we have reached now really the wildest moment of the game. You can guess what Garry Kasparov will do here. He will sacrifice simply the queen, but actually the best way is not to sacrifice the queen. The best way is to play simply queen to d7, and then the position is much better for black, because white played this unnecessary queen to b3 idea. Now you see after bishop to e5, we can simply take. Black will lose then the dark square bishop, but still after bishop to a6, here black can continue to pin this knight on b5. After queen to e4, here maybe f6 could be played, and now a4. We can, I think, agree that black is much better, because black is up the exchange, although white is here now this extra pawn, but still with rook to d8, this is playable for black. Eventually will take out this pawn for sure. So what Garry Kasparov, as I said, after the move bishop to c7, queen to d7 would be the best way, but Garry Kasparov probably saw this line, but here I think he played a little bit for the audience, and he tried now the move a6, and he sacrificed his queen in move 12. Really wild stuff. You see Frank Berghost accepts the challenge. What should he do? Of course he takes the queen, and now after a takes b5, the queen is attacked, so you have to retreat. Queen to c2. If you try something like queen to b5, it's not so good, because you get bishop to c3, first the check, after something like king to d1, then rook to d8, and you see now the d5 pawn is also hanging with the support of these 2 knights, with the support of the bishop. White is simply lost. You could try maybe bishop to c4, but now we're simply taking the rook on a1, and now we can retreat. Still we can play also knight to c3 is an opportunity in order to play this fork. So it's simply a bad game now for white, although black doesn't have any more the queen. If you try queen to b4 in this position, it's again not good. We simply take the rook, bishop takes a1, and here after bishop to e7, that could be an opportunity for black. Still, you see bishop to c3 is a move that wins the game for black immediately. So that's why after the move a takes b5, Frank Berghost found basically the best move, queen to c2, but now bishop to c3, first the check, and now queen takes c3. Frank Berghost has to give back the queen, because here if you try king to d1 in order to escape, you get simply again this idea rook to d8. It's the main, I think, attacking possibility here for black. If you try rook to b1, again we can take out this pawn. Rook to d5 is a possibility, so again the king gets trapped. So really wild sacrifice. So here Frank Berghost found really the best move. He took simply the bishop on c3. We have knight to c3, and now bishop to e7. The evaluation is now about equal. So you see this guy Frank Berghost reacted here correctly after his couple inaccuracies in the opening. Now he has an equal game, but you have to prove your position, of course, against such a sharp attacker like Garry Kasparov. After bishop to e7, knight to b3. Very nice move by Garry Kasparov. You see the rook is hanging on the a file, but also Garry Kasparov's rook is hanging on f8. Here we have rook to d1. You don't have good squares for the rook, you lose the rook anyway, so that's why at least we're protecting the rook by the king here. So that's why I think it was also a necessary move by Frank Bergos, although here probably the best way is to simply play bishop to f8, and then after king to f8, then maybe to play rook to b1, then if black takes, knight takes b1, then to take out this knight. That would be the suggested line by the engine. At least we're hanging on to this position, although black's activity of the minor pieces is much better, but still you see white has here two centralized pawns, and now black would be forced to play something like rook to a1, rook to g1, and now bishop to f5. Knight to d4 is the suggested line by the engine, and now knight to c3. Black can maybe recapture this pawn on d5, is also probably attacking then afterwards this weak pawn on b3. But as I said, in this scenario, I think maybe white could regroup, white could hope maybe for a draw. But rook to d1 is not the best of moves here. Garry Kasparov simply takes out the pawn. We have bishop to f8, comes a little bit too late, because now after knight to d4, bishop to b5 was also slightly better. After knight to d1, king to d1, then maybe rook to a1, and okay, you're losing the rook, but we can also take out the knight on b3, and at least we have now two connected pawns in the center with the support of the bishop. Maybe again white could have hang on to this position and hope for a draw, but knight to d4 wasn't the most accurate move here. Garry Kasparov simply takes. After knight takes b3, we have knight to f2, so Garry Kasparov doesn't have to lose his knight, and you see now this knight is very active. It's supported by the rook, and also now suddenly these two pawns are long-term weaknesses. Rook to g1, knight to b4, here a fork. Very nice idea here by Garry Kasparov. He attacks now both pawns. We have d6, knight takes e3, knight to c5 here. Frank Bergos is trying a very nice idea. He's trying d7 and d8, the promotion, so the knight is supporting the d7 square. Very nice move. And here Garry Kasparov found great ways how to counterattack, because if you play now here this move d7, then king to e7 is still holding the position. It's not a problem so far, but at least you see black has defended this position somehow, so that's why pushing the pawn is not an option. But still, this is, I think, a very annoying pawn. It can be pushed afterwards, but again you see this activity of white pieces. The bishop is out of game, the rook is a little bit trapped here. The rook doesn't have a good activity. On the other hand, of course, Garry Kasparov's rook is playing perfectly fine here. So here h3 attacking the bishop. We have rook to c2, counter attack against the knight, knight to a6, and now bishop to e6. We have bishop to e2, and now bishop to c4. Very nice idea. We want to have now another possibility to push this pawn further with the support of the knight and also with the support of the rook, because this rook on g1 is still out of game. This rook is simply bad there. So bishop to f3, we have knight to f5 attacking the pawn, d7, but now again this idea king to e7, knight to b1, and now rook to c1. Here Garry Kasparov trades off these pieces, but now he has the opportunity to attack the bishop, and now suddenly this is a weak pawn, and Garry Kasparov has a winning endgame, because he will eventually take out this pawn, and then he has of course this pass pawn on the b file. So this should be winning, but let's see now how Garry Kasparov handled this endgame. Bishop to e4, f5, kicking with the bishop, bishop to b1, bishop to e6, attacking the pawn, and now Garry Kasparov simply takes the pawn, king to e3, knight to c6, attacking the knight, and now we have knight takes d7. Frank Bergos tried at least to make a draw here by keeping the bishop on the board, because the bishop is of course a long range piece. The knight is not so good when it comes to this endgames where pieces are all over the board, when pawns are on both sides, but still Garry Kasparov has two extra pawns, so it's, I think, simply completely winning for black here. So g4, f takes g4, h takes g4. Now the king has to play, of course, bishop to a2. We have king to d4 by Kasparov, king to g5, knight to e5. If now of course the king moves to h6, we'll simply take out this pawn, and then with knight to e5 we could have another protection of the pawn on g6. So in the game, Berhoz tried bishop to g8, attacking the pawn, and now Garry Kasparov simply pushed the pawn further. We have bishop to h7, although probably king to f4 is slightly better, but still it's much better. Here Garry Kasparov can play ideas like knight to c4, knight to g4 is also an opportunity, so it's really wild endgame. So here in the game, knight to d3, attacking the king. Pardon me, after bishop to h7, we have now b3, continuing to push the pawn. We have b2, and now Frank Berhoz has to play the move bishop to a2 in order to prevent some promotion ideas here on b1. So king to c3, we have bishop to b1, king to d2, and now king to f4. Now Garry Kasparov also counterattacks the bishop here on b1. We have bishop to e4, and now very nice idea by Garry Kasparov, knight to c4. What Garry Kasparov is trying to do now, of course, is to get the knight somewhere here on c2, where the knight is cutting off the connection between the bishop and the square b1. If the knight comes on c2, then of course we could push the pawn further on b1 and promote the queen. So bishop to g6, and now Garry Kasparov plays on this idea, knight to c2, and in this position Frank Berhoz resigned. So incredible game, in such a beautiful queen sacrifice in an early stage of the game. Please, you should really think about it. This was a simultaneous exhibition, so you have this tactics to calculate. You have also some tactics from some other games to calculate. Really beautiful chess game played by Garry Kasparov, and in the future we'll see, I think, more games like this, because this was simply now the new Garry Kasparov with some sharp plays, with some beautiful attacks. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. That's why I decided to show you this one. If you want to see more Garry Kasparov games, check out my series so far. Here's the link, the Garry Kasparov's Path to Glory series. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all time, check out my best chess games of all time series with some other games from chess history. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.